this evening. Members of the public are encouraged to listen to the information, but please refrain from interacting in the discussion that is occurring with council members. I will now hand over to Richard Frimpong, Senior Traffic Engineer. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Mayor Redmond. We'll just wait about a minute just until we get the presentation up, and then we can get cracking. Yeah. All right, excellent. Yep, everyone ready? All right, cool. Yep, thank you for joining me tonight. I just thought I'd give a bit of a brief update around the Edith Street, Short Street and Blanch Street traffic calming investigation. So this sort of forms as like a council briefing based on the local road closure trial that we discussed further back in January of 2024. And just to sort of get us started, I thought I would just go through the timeline of events to sort of where we are today. So back in August of 2021, a petition was received from the affected residents. I use the word affected to talk about the streets of Edith Street, Short Street and Blanch Street. So if that terminology comes up through the presentation, that's what it means. But the key issues that were raised through the petition was cut-through traffic and speeding. So then this followed in 2022 with an independent investigation by MFY traffic consultants who prepared a traffic report along with, I suppose, an analysis and some recommendations around what interventions could be considered. In conjunction with UIPS, who conducted the initial stakeholder engagement with a number of different options that were presented to the residents as well. If there was any key things to get out of the data is that, I suppose, as council staff, we acknowledge that cut-through traffic does occur on all three streets. To a higher extent, it's on Edith Street. There's a high proportion. Relative to Blanch Street and Short Street is much lower. And the 85th percentile speeds were broadly acceptable in saying that generally the default speed limit on local roads is 50 kilometres an hour. I'll get to that in a little bit more detail because I've provided that data. In September 2022, council staff put up a resolution to install road cushions and undertake the intersection realignment. The road cushions were not supported. The intersection realignment was supported, and from that resolution, council staff were requested to investigate further options. This followed in May, where 3 different options were presented at a resident meeting workshop, and those options were discussed with the residents, and I through the engagement in that process, raised 1-lane perimeter thresholds ended up being the preference. So as council staff, we did a cost analysis on that and undertook wider engagement on that specific option. I won't go through the details of the engagement, but I suppose because of the cost being in the order of $400,000 excluding GST, it's quite cost prohibitive to do. And I guess going back full circle, and going back to the initial issue around cut-through traffic, the only real other option that could be put on the table was the local road closure trial, because that's the only option out of, I suppose, a number of traffic calming devices that would actually directly deal with the volume aspect. So that's sort of where we are, I suppose, coming up to today. Just to give you a brief synopsis around what we call the 85th percentile speed and the daily traffic volumes. Those are the metrics that we use in traffic engineering to assess streets. I just want us to talk about Short Street and Blanch Street in the first instance. Both those streets have an 85th percentile speed well below 50 kilometres an hour. And just on that alone, that is generally within what we call acceptable limits. The daily traffic volume on Blanch Street and Short Street is generally within about 500 vehicles a day. While cut-through traffic does occur, there are a number of local streets within Gawler where cut-through occurs, but the volumes are of sort of a similar extent. And there's also local streets where you don't get that much cut-through, and the volumes are equivalent as well. So from that perspective, I guess our determination is that Short Street and Blanch Street isn't warranted for speed or volume-related measures. Edith Street has an 85th percentile speed of 51 kilometres an hour. This has hovered between 51 and 52 kilometres per hour based on about 4 different traffic count surveys we've undertaken in the last 6 years. So more or less that number hasn't changed that much. The daily traffic volume has gradually increased over time. The most recent traffic count that's been undertaken identified close to 2,400 vehicles per day on the northern section of Edith Street and almost 2,000 vehicles per day on the southern section. So this has grown steadily, which can be expected just because of the growth rates as well that have occurred in Gawler. I suppose I just want to contextualise as well as to what those numbers mean. I suppose if you break it down by peak hour movements and what occurs in the peak hour, that's probably it's equivalent to about 6 to 8 vehicles per minute on Edith Street. Crash history. I think this is an important thing to look at as well. So we've contacted the Department for Infrastructure and Transport to give us a detailed breakdown around the crashes that have occurred in the vicinity. There's been 5 incidences that have occurred over the space of a 6-year period, which equates to a crash rate of about 0.8 crashes per year. 4 of these crashes resulted in property damage only. One of those crashes was a hit pedestrian at the intersection of Edith Street and Lyndoch Road and Daly Street. It occurred back in 2019. It did result in minor injuries just based on the reports that were provided. But I suppose irrespective in relation to the crashes, this level of crashing is generally quite low and not in line with what is called a black spot location, which generally is the location where there are 3 casualty crashes over a period, which there are a few of across Gawler and South Australia. But relatively speaking, the crash history along Edith Street, Short Street and Blanch Street is quite low. I'll just jump to the next slide. I suppose some of the key objectives that we've had, I suppose, pretty much right from the start of the project was just around 4 different key criteria. The first one being a measurable regulation in traffic volume. So again, council staff, we acknowledge that cut-through does occur on Edith Street and Blanch Street and Short Street. A measurable regulation in traffic speed. Just given that the 85th percentile speeds on Edith Street are 51 kilometres an hour and the other streets are below 50. From a traffic perspective, it's not a priority in terms of traffic speed. Simply because, again, there's other streets that have higher 85th percentile speeds, which was also identified in the Williston local LATM. The next one was least reasonable cost to council, because, again, traffic calming does come at a cost, and it does impact on, obviously, the ability to deliver other interventions in other locations as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And the last point, must consider the impact on the arterial road network, that being Lyndoch Road and Murray Street. Look, that's critically important again, and we highlighted that as well at the council meeting in January 2024, that we'd need to engage with the Department for Infrastructure and Transport and the emergency services, because they're stakeholders of that road, and they're going to have a view around the works that we do as well and how that affects them. So just to reiterate some of the key points is that traffic speeds on Edith Street, traffic volumes are higher on Edith Street relative to other local streets. It's not ideal, but the speeds again are in line with like the default speed limit. They're a touch above, but again, there are a number of other streets through previous LATMs that have identified higher speeds. And I'll just jump to the next slide. I just wanted to share this slide because it gives, I suppose, an overall context just as council staff as to how many different options, I suppose, we've looked at. And I suppose what we've tried to do is break this all down in quite a qualitative way. Again, based on those 4 criteria that we had in that previous slide, which was traffic volume, speed, cost, and impact on Lyndoch and Murray Street, that we're looking at those as it related to the different interventions. So what we can gather from that is that of all the traffic calming devices that are available, there's really only one that has a major impact in terms of the volume, and that being the local road closure, hence the investigation and further look into that. A lot of the other traffic calming devices, such as the raised 1-lane perimeter thresholds, the road humps, the road cushions, angled slow points and raised platforms, may have some impact on volume, but not much, not to the same extent. Their target is more directed towards speed, and on top of that as well, the cost of installing these interventions are quite cost prohibitive. I've also put in there do nothing as well, just to give context around what that also means as well. So again, we've looked further into the local and partial road closure options. We've looked at 4 different options, and that's what we've engaged with the state government and emergency services on. So I'll just give a brief explanation around just what each of these ones are, and then I'll just do a bit of a breakdown in terms of what that then means. So the first option was a full closure, and look, there's a few different ways you could do that, but an idea around that is that, again, you put you close it off at the railway line. That has obviously the greatest volume impact on Edith Street, but inversely, the biggest impact on Murray Street and Lyndoch Road. The next one is the partial northbound closure, and again, this one has the second highest impact on Murray Street and Lyndoch Road, but then again, the second highest volume reduction on Edith Street. This is without modelling as well, by the way. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. The reason why I suppose we can make that qualitative assessment now is that there's a higher northbound movement on Edith Street than there is a southbound movement based on the data that we've collected. The next one is a partial southbound closure, which again would have the third highest impact on Murray Street and Lyndoch Road, but the third least impact on Edith Street. And then the last one is a soft closure, which is basically just a traffic control sign which you might put out to restrict turning movements during peak times, which is the least impactful on Murray Street and Lyndoch Road, but because it's only a sign, it wouldn't do much in terms of a deterrence. So the challenge here again, with local road closures is that while it can have an effective and positive impact on Edith Street, it's at a consequence to the overall function of the arterial road network. If we jump to the next slide, we've done quite a bit of stakeholder engagement. We've approached the Department for Infrastructure and Transport, the SA Ambulance, Gawler Health Service, South Australian Police, Norma, who are the waste collection, and the MFS and CFS. However, we weren't able to get any feedback from the MFS and CFS. Notwithstanding, when we approached the Department for Infrastructure and Transport, they naturally had concerns around extended queuing and delays on Lyndoch Road, and from their perspective, their next steps would be that council needs to undertake a detailed SIDRA intersection model for Lyndoch Road and the surrounding road network, which would cost in the order of $13,160. So, for context, we haven't done that, but I suppose that's what the cost would be to council to go ahead and go through that exercise. While we undertook strategic modelling in JITS, that's looking at the strategic road network. Generally, for any localised locations, you have to use a more detailed program. And then the second point that they raised as well is that if there are any delays on Murray Street and Lyndoch Road, that council would have to endorse the delay. So they were quite some very strong points that they made as well in relation to that. SA Ambulance and Gawler Health Service were, I suppose, not supportive of any of the options put forward, and their primary concerns related to queuing and delays on the arterial road network, and in particular how that affects emergency services and ambulances getting to and from where they need to go. They did indicate that they are open to less volume obstructive measures, like road humps and road cushions. But that again, as we sort of highlighted earlier, those measures wouldn't necessarily, well, they might have some impact on the volume, but again, at a higher cost.
That's a quick question.
Yeah.
Richard, could you just explain what it means by council to endorse delay? What does that actually mean?
Look, that was I've just taken their words directly, but I think more or less what that's inferring is that if there's if we went ahead with pursuing a closure, then well, firstly DIT would need to assess the model, and if they're not comfortable with what the modelling outcomes come back with from that, then they might even have an objection straight away. But even if they were in the middle or didn't, then they could potentially come back and say, look, we know that this is going to have delays, but it's a council-led initiative, and yeah. Yeah, look. Yeah, look. In a lack of better words, yes. I'll jump on to the next one, which was the South Australian Police. So, look, they were more or less indifferent. From an operation perspective, they said it didn't really impact the way that they would go about doing things. I suppose the key thing that sort of come out of that discussion, however, is that if you did undertake passive measures, then they're not going to be able to sit there 24/7 just checking whether people can... Yeah. And in terms of Norma, again, they're more or less a waste collection. So from their perspective, they can work around whatever can be done on the affected streets. In particular, though, they did highlight that they're not supportive of a northbound closure, and I'll explain why that is just in this slide here. So just in that second document there, the issue from their perspective is turnaround facilities. So a waste truck can generally only reverse about 30 to 40 metres before they're uncomfortable, so within their own policies. In this particular case here, the length of street there is between 200 to 250 metres, so it's not satisfactory for them to be able to turn around in that location. So I suppose, given the recent discussion as well around Concordia in the previous briefing session, I thought I might just touch on that as well, because there's a lot of strategic work that's going on in this space. And you might, I suppose, part of the reason why our recommendation back in January was to steer away from a more cost-prohibitive measure was because there's a lot of work, there's obviously a lot of investigations going on in the space around connections through to Concordia, as well as the railway line investigation works, which I'll touch on in the next slide. But put it shortly, any sort of northeastern collector road would have a material impact on Murray Street and Barossa Valley Way, and then subsequently Edith Street, because a lot of the reason why cut-through traffic is occurring on Edith Street is because of the delays and queues that are occurring on Barossa Valley Way and Murray Street. To put it simply, that's the reason why it's occurring. So, and when we did transport modelling as part of the Gawler Integrated Transport Strategy, as well as some of the modelling that we've done in the Gawler East Interventions Assessment, that's also identified that without any sort of intervention or northeastern connection, Edith Street, along with a number of other local streets, are at risk of growing or increasing in traffic volume. So that's something to be wary of as we go into the future. However, should Concordia progress and a northeastern link road is considered viable, that obviously has material benefits on Murray Street and Lindott Road as well, which could have long-term. So in short, the Concordia investigations do have material impacts on Lindott Road, Murray Street and Edith Street. Just jumping into the next slides around the Adelaide Railway extension investigation. So as you're aware, back in June of 2024, the state government announced that they would be commissioning a investigation into the extension of the railway line to both the northern and southern parts of Adelaide. While I suppose we haven't had any direct correspondence with them on that, we envisage that given the work that's occurring at Concordia, that the disused Barossa line is part of that discussion. And I suppose I just want to sort of flag as well that at the moment, the Gawler Railway line terminates at Gawler Central Station just before it reaches Murray Street. So at present, Murray Street and Edith Street both have railway crossing infrastructure. However, the train doesn't actually go past those destinations because it's disused. Should the railway investigation come back and determine that that is a feasible option to extend the railway line, then there's almost guaranteed to be material impacts on both Murray Street and Edith Street. And while it's not I suppose while I'm not an expert in providing advice around what the grades and requirements are around, I guess, providing a above grade or below grade solution, I would strongly speculate that Edith Street might be impacted if it was raised above or below because of the grades and the topography of the land.
So is the Gawler Railway line going to be electrified?
So the Gawler Railway line is already electrified up to Gawler Central. In terms of what happens beyond that, we don't know. Yeah. And that would be subject to the state government's investigation. Yeah. I should also flag as well that when the Gawler line was electrified, the King Street Bridge was converted from a road bridge into a pedestrian bridge. And while I suppose I wasn't here at the time, I did notice that there was chicanes or angled slow points on King Street, assumably because of vehicles moving towards the town centre, and we've actually got traffic counts on that road, which was about 1,500 vehicles a day at that time. While we haven't got traffic counts there, I have been out in the street, and it does appear to be observably much lower with the pedestrian footbridge. So look, I just thought I'd just summarise just based on the outcomes that we've had here. So council staff firstly acknowledge that cut-through traffic does occur on Edith Street, Short Street and Blanch Street. The crash history is quite low on these affected streets. Look, I know that there are a number of near-miss reports that we receive directly, but based on the data that we receive, we can only go off the data that has been recorded. We can't go off speculative data. And the 85th percentile speeds on the affected streets are generally below 50 k's an hour. Edith Street is slightly above, but again, it's a re-emphasis that speed treatment isn't a priority. As I sort of mentioned in the January council report, the only cost-effective option at reducing volume on Edith Street is a local road closure, but that's not without its implications, and that being the additional work of having to traffic model that, plus council hours to facilitate that process, and that still wouldn't guarantee a direction forward. We've engaged with the SA Ambulance, Gawler Health Service and Department of Transport, who do have material concerns around the extended queuing and delays on the arterial road network. So again, their SA Ambulance and Gawler Health's advice is that they don't support any form of closure at this point in time, and DIT, while they haven't given a position, have, again, based on the information provided to you tonight, do have concerns. And I suppose just in light of the meeting that we had an hour earlier and the Adelaide rail investigations, any future work that we do on traffic calming in this space has the risk of becoming redundant. I say that in that if we go ahead with any sort of speed calming, which is quite cost prohibitive, if through the Adelaide Railway investigation it's identified that there's going to have to be changes there, then that could be money that's also spent that ends up calming a street that doesn't need it in the long term. And further to that as well, in terms of any further modelling, again, there's no immediate outcome that we will be able to receive until now, until such time that we work with the Concordia Structural Plan and Adelaide Railway investigations. So from that, it's therefore a recommendation that we cease investigations at this time. But look, that's not to say again that there might be some long-term holistic measures, particularly if future connections are provided to Concordia that might relieve traffic on Murray Street and Lyndoch Road, because then it provides again that opportunity of dealing with two problems at the same time. The unfortunate situation at the moment is that there's two competing interests, and it's obviously quite cost prohibitive to do something. Well, one, it's not our intersection, Murray Street and Lyndoch Road, but secondly, there's not any additional space to change or reconfigure that intersection. So look, that summarises the presentation and our findings. Look, happy to take any further questions from the council on the matter.
Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. I guess just moving forward, obviously we had a report in January that did talk about some trials and like cause and effect. I understand there's been a lot of work going behind the scenes, and it's probably, I think, admittedly a more complex issue than what you probably thought it was leading in, potentially. But the trial, the cause and effect, we've never actually gone through to substantiate some of these things. We are, I thought we were talking about, the thing that I was attracted to back when was, all right, this might not be the solution, but actually seeing that cause and effect and really sort of poking the hornet's nest and seeing it all would be a good way forward and a data gathering exercise, if nothing else. Then we also talked to the meeting before about the development that was quite adamant. It is a 30-year development, and some of the early infrastructure delivery might not be for another decade. 2,384 vehicles per day has actually gone up a bit in more recent time, just because of general organics of our region growing, So it wouldn't take much for a development more locally, whether that be Roseworthy, whether that be a smaller development up Lyndoch Road in Lyndoch, to actually add to that effect. And I also do agree with the cut-through data that we've got as well in Williston. Absolutely, some of those data gathering streams have shown a lot worse roads volume-wise, but the thing about Edith Street I've seen is just that narrowness of it as well. That is a really big contributing factor. I think 2,384 vehicles per day is similar to what we see on Haynes Road, but Haynes Road is more of a modern day built for cars, not that horse and cart with that sweeping bend. So I guess my question is, are we putting a nail in the coffin here and saying, look, we hear your concern, but we can't do anything for you? Or are we still looking at potential other options? Are we still going to try to massage things through with DIT? Are we still looking at speed changes in that whole suburb down to 40, because on that narrow road, 52 kilometres an hour is a high speed if you're standing there watching it happen, holding a child's hand, you know. So I guess just are we at the end and going, look, we're done now, or are we sort of, because I'm just looking at cease any further investigation, and I guess my emotional response is, well, that's a shame. I was really interested in seeing what data we'd get from actually boots on ground trialling something.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Nathan. That is a good question. We're not saying it's a nail in the coffin. In terms of trialling a local road closure, we can't even do a trial without DIT's approval. So we need to do that modelling, and frankly, on the odds of them approving it, which are low, we don't think that's a useful spend of money. And the cause and effect over a trial period, in all honesty, I think it's only going to prove what we already know, that yes, it will have positive impact on the local streets, and it will have negative impact on the arterial road network, which DIT will come back and say, well, yep, you've proved your modelling, no, we don't agree with it going forward, or we agree with it on whatever conditions that, you know, the council will take the responsibility for the outfall. I think in terms of doing that trial, that is the end of the road at this point, until we get that further data that's going to come through. I know for some people who are listening online and who are in the room, you haven't been privy to the confidential briefing we've just had from the state government around the Concordia structure planning, and some of the timeframes, which are not, they're not 10-year timeframes for us to get the structure plan detail. They're starting to come through in the next 9 to 12 months, which will actually provide the timing for the different traffic interventions. And that's the point that we would reinitiate, reconsidering what we do on Edith Street, because that allows us to make a balanced decision on, if nothing's going to happen for 10 to 15 years and traffic volumes will continue to increase, we need to be transparent, because there is growth up in Gulleries and there is growth out in Roseworthy and everywhere in between, then we need to come back and, you know, perhaps at that point there is an intervention and a dollar value that we would, as council and as council staff, be prepared to recommend. But if those interventions are going to start to come online in 3-5 year horizons, then we need to do that, I guess, cost-benefit analysis for advantage at the local and more holistic council, and then regional scale as well. Okay, Richard, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, look, I mean, around the actual width of the street, look, I don't know the exact measurements, but I do know that the street is generally wider than most new roads that are built today, so it is wider than that 7.4 dimension. Look, that's not. It's not to say that we think that the volumes there at the moment are in line with what a local road is. The issue that we have is that, and Wendy articulated it well, is that we're at a roadblock in that, one, DIT are not supportive even of a local trial unless we do a lot further investigations, and even with that additional money that's spent, we're still not guaranteed a pathway forward where, at least through Concordia structural plan, there's opportunities to resolve this more holistically.
And sorry, I should have been clearer about the width and the. Absolutely, I don't disagree that local roads are designed to put up local traffic, but we acknowledge this is more than your local traffic, which was the point I was trying to make in that aspect. Yeah. Because this is now floating with that connector road, not local road, even though it is, you know, designed for a horse and cart. So that was the differentiation there that I was trying to make. But I guess around the reported incidents side of things as well, you know, yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I get it. I do understand the linking, but I also get the residents that are living it day to day as well. So, you know, I do feel their frustration, and I guess how we as a council are going to navigate through the explanation of why They're dealing with the near misses they're dealing with because of 2,384 cars per day running through that local road. And look, as a council, we're going to have to figure out how to get that message right, because, you know, we did cause a bit of an upset in the greater community, realistically, because we know a lot of ratepayers that don't want to lose their, I'm going to call it a connector road at this point in time, because that's what it is for the locals. And the argument there is, well, you know, some of these locals have as much right as the ratepayers, the pay rates there as they do. But it would be an interesting argument if they swapped houses as well, you know. And when we start getting into those sorts of conversations is where we are right now. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm trying to figure this one out.
Yeah, Richard, I just want to clarify the term cut through. I'm glad we're not using the word rat run anymore, because I think that was a bit, I think that was pretty obnoxious, really, a word to use. But a cut through, isn't that people just using the local road network that they've paid for? Isn't that what it is?
Yeah, I'll answer the question around cut through versus rat running. So the reason why I use the word cut through is based on the Roads guides. That's a terminology that's used rather than the term rat run. People refer to, whether you call it rat running or cut through, they mean the same thing. But I know one has a different connotation than the other. I just follow what's in the guidelines. In terms of what cut through means, look, that definition is a little bit vague. Like how I sort of see it is someone basically going from whether it be within if it's within the immediate local catchment, I don't know if you necessarily say that would be cut through. Like sometimes if you want to get from, say, Gozard Street down to like the town centre, then you're going to go through a number of other local streets to get there first, and that isn't necessarily cut through. It's like you need to get but in terms of like Edith Street, I think it's fair to say that probably a large majority of those people that are coming from Williston or Hewitt and trying to get to other parts of Gawler East, or even from the broader network as well. It's hard to actually quantify. Like when the surveys were done, they just looked at, okay, well, what's the traffic that's turning in from Murray Road and going to Lyndoch Road and vice versa. It's hard to then work out who's doing what. But I imagine that in the case of Edith Street, it's a mixture of a number of different combinations.
I suppose the other thing is we did have that bigger survey when we looked at the interventions, and overwhelmingly the community said that they weren't in support of road closures. So, you know, this has probably come to its natural end, you know, because we actually went out to the community and actually said, oh, these are all the options, and resoundingly the broader community said no, and there was only a small percentage that said yes.
Yeah.
So it's probably a natural end to it.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you've got to look at the reasons why they said no. I mean, look, without sort of looking further into the data, at least based on the updated survey, when we did the second engagement, that talked about the raised intersection, but road closures did come up in a few of the respondents. A lot of the reasons, again, is just around trying to, I guess, is more around that there's congestion around Murray Street and Lyndoch Road, and that's the primary driver. When the initial engagement was done, though, it more or less just said, you know, do you support or don't support road closure, without actually saying what that actually really means. So I don't think that, I think that gives a reasonable picture, but I don't think that gives the full picture unless you actually explain what it actually means and what that, quantifiably means in terms of Lyndoch Road and Murray Street. You'd have to dig that question deeper. And look, I'm not suggesting, my recommendation isn't to do that as a next step, because there's just a lot of structural planning work and state government-led work that's occurring in this region, and anything that we do at this point in time has the risk to debunk, well, not debunk, but become redundant, just because the work that they do might supersede it, and yeah.
Richard, who has the authority to change a giveaway sign to a stop sign in the town of Gawler of the roads that we own, because at the moment that's happening. And I was in Blanch Street the other day, I was talking to a few people, and I said, oh, how's everything going? Is it simmering down? They said, yes, it certainly has, since the stop sign was put there. I thought that was quite interesting. But I live up in Melaleuca Drive, and Cheek Avenue now, there's going to be a roundabout built on Carlton Road. The police were having a real joyous day the other day because the giveaway sign is now a stop sign. And a lot of people think, give way, I'll just slow down a bit and then I'll nick off. Stop sign, you've got to stop. So I'm just wondering, who authorises these things? And the other thing, I appreciate CEO Chris answering my emails today, but in the time I've spent around it, because this was coming up tonight, I asked the question, why could there not be a stop sign put on Edith Street at Short Street? You may say, oh, because the road runs around like that. Exactly, Blanch Street does the same. It comes down and it goes around down to the railway line. But there's been a stop sign put there, okay? That's new because I haven't seen it before, other than that it went around without it. But if you put a stop sign, it's not much, just one sign. If we have the authority to do so at Short Street, I bet that's going to stop the mentality of the person that decides to want to use that as a speedway. And I can tell you, Melaleuca Drive at the moment, if you want to put a bead on there, since the stop sign's been there, Melaleuca Drive is a constant flow of traffic. It's nearly double. So the question is, who has the authority to put a stop sign, a simple sign called stop?
Yeah. So under Section 17 of the Road Traffic Act, I have the sub-delegations to put traffic control devices in place, which includes a stop or a give way sign. Within the Australian standards, there's generally a rule and requirement around when you use a give way and when you use a stop sign. So where we use a give way sign is generally where there's an intersection which isn't quite clear where the priority is. In the case of Edith Street and Short Street, that intersects as a Y junction, hence the need for a give way. But you're probably talking about the intersection as well of Blanch Street and Short Street where we've got a stop sign, and the reason for that is just around sightlines. So the simple answer is sightlines. So if you don't have enough sightlines, that's generally where you put a stop sign. And if there's plenty of visibility down either way to see what's coming, then you put a give way sign. But you certainly wouldn't put a stop sign or something in a different location just to try and intervene with traffic calming. You generally only put those at locations where you want to control traffic. Yeah, so I probably didn't answer your question very well, but...
No, but I mean, how do you know it unless you give it a try? I mean, if we own the roads, surely to goodness we can put a stop sign at Short and Edith, and if it works, it's great.
Yeah, I have to install devices that are in accordance with Australian standards, so I can't just put a stop sign where there's a give way just to try and get a different effect. It has to comply with standards, and again, it comes down to sightlines. If the sightlines are insufficient, then you put a stop sign. So an example of where it's insufficient is High Street and Ayres Road, I think it is, where you've got to look well up the hill, and then a give way where you can see what's coming from both sides. So that's the determination. Look, that's not to say that there might be some signs within Gawler that might not be the right determination. And if you think there are any that should be changed or that are wrong, more than happy for you to list those intersections and we can review those in more detail.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But Blanch Street and Edith Street are the same length, and at Short Street it's exactly the same style of thing. Today I had people call me, which I went over to 14th Street. 14th Street, somebody else lives there too as well. Now, because people can't get out of 12th Street into the main road, they're using 14th Street. And I would say the traffic's probably double. So it's happening all over Gawler, this thing called, what do you call it, rat running or...
Yeah. Yeah. Let's have a separate conversation, Brian, and maybe we can look at those locations in more detail.
So in terms of communication, I guess I think we probably could do a bit more in terms of helping the community understand what the actual problem is here, because council is not the problem. The problem is that there's been a lot of new housing and no new infrastructure from the state government. And then if we try to install if we try to block the road, it'll probably get blocked by DIT because they're relying on the rat running occurring in order to shore up the fact that they haven't put any infrastructure in yet. Obviously, we have to put that nicer. But, is that something that, I don't know, as part of motions and things, can we, talk about communication with the state government on pushing the need for some of this broader change that's sort of the main issue?
Look, that's a good question, Cody. Look, I think Eleanor kind of said it really well in that I suppose the best outcomes come about when you work together and you're transparent in, I suppose, some of the challenges that you work and deal with. Like certainly in terms of some of the state government strategy work, like locations like these are ones that we're flagging with them. So that might not be their first priority because they've got main roads and arterial roads to maintain, and generally because a lot of these local streets are maintained by council, they've obviously haven't got, like while they have better mechanisms to influence change, their level of interest might not be as high. But I suppose ultimately if we're bringing these up in discussions, then that again, it's one of these things where if we've got local issues that might be contributed by growth and congestion in our road network, then we can bring those things up and discuss them with them.
And I can add to that as well. I can reassure you, in every forum possible, we raise, in particular, this issue. The Murray Street-Lyndoch Road intersection causes problems not only for Edith, Blanch and Stewart streets, but some other streets as well. And at the end of the day, the traffic congestion, admittedly, while it is linked generally to peak periods only, does cause, frustration for thousands of drivers every day. That is something I can reassure you. We as staff are constantly bringing up the fact that we have got a main street that is constrained by rivers and rail and buildings that don't actually allow for any further improvement in traffic flow efficiency than what they have currently got. And with growth on our doorstep at every angle, it is only harder and harder for our local traffic. Whether there's mechanisms that, there's a letter from council to ministers or whatever, just again, I guess backing up that council-led discussion, but I will down to the governance people. But yeah, rest assured staff are certainly doing it, and we are doing it in the spirit, again, of building relationships with the state government agencies, because we believe that is the most effective way to get, the best outcome for all parties in the most cost-effective way. But I do acknowledge it might not feel like the most time-effective way for people who are affected right now, and that's a hard message for us to share with everybody as well. Like, this isn't. I think if we had a silver bullet for this, we would be presenting it, but we don't. This is a complicated matter, and and that's evidenced by the fact that this has actually been going on for 30 years. And in that time frame, no one can really find the solution. But I do believe that because we have got the wider infrastructure interventions being considered, that we're coming into a period where we can probably make some better decisions once we've got more information about that.
So, sorry, just quickly, if somehow, some miracle, state government turned around and said, oh, actually, you know what, the work we're doing, it'd be interesting to see some cause and effect. We do provide you some support in doing a trial that looks like X, Y, and Z. Does that open up the conversation again pretty instantly? Absolutely. Yep.
I'd like to thank Wendy, Nathan, Isaac, Cody and Paul and Chris for all your comments. Thank you. I think that Concordia will be a critical element. I think that will be a critical element. With the northeast bypass, that will create all sorts of outcomes. Yeah. So, thank you everybody. We will go home now.
Cheers. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, thank you.